One of the central features of the book of Leviticus is ritual purity and impurity. It deals with what was seen as physical impurities, such as menstruation, diseases, and seminal emissions, and treats them as a spiritual state that prevented access to holy areas. Whilst the process is aimed at inclusion and readmission to a holy state, it uses skills, adjudicators, the priests, not mob rule. There are also many problems and negative aspects to this portion. The abuse of such God-given power and authority structures still pervades and infects what we call civilized society. Much of our society is civil, and yet to call us civilized is to suggest that the job is done. The response to websites such as Everyone's Invited, testimonies from survivors of rape and sexual assault, abuse, eating disorders, suicidal or suicidal ideation, violence, child abuse and paedophilia, reminds us that our society falls short. We perhaps fall short, not because we haven't made huge strides, challenging clear and obvious crimes, rather because the foundational power structures that still permeate our society are sometimes subtle and generally go unchallenged. Take Leviticus 12, which we have just heard. A woman who gives birth is considered impure. I could put a full stop there, but for a period of time that matches that for menstruation. Many obvious problems. She then undergoes a further period of purification before then bringing a chatat, a sin offering. Whilst used for purification purposes, there is no getting away from that word chatat, sin, and the fact that the priest then calls for chiper, for atonement for her. There are still ways in which society favours men over women, such as the need to pay for tampons and sanitary pads for natural phenomenon. But I wish to raise something more subtle in the biblical account. The mother's period of impurity and subsequent period of purification is double the length for a girl. Our sages explain this in a number of ways. Some are deeply unpleasant examples of misogyny. The Talmud contains a whole male written tractate, Nidah, concerning women's impurity. We read, for example, from Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, and why did the Torah command 7 days of impurity for a boy, but 14 for a girl? He answers his own question, since everyone is excited about a male child. However, the majority motivation for these laws reflects the ancients would say misunderstanding of biological process and the grounding of law in a biblical account of Adam and Eve. In other words, they didn't know so much better. Well, we do know better. So why, as I waited to be served at Wenzel's this morning, were the two gentlemen in front of me asking the woman serving to raise her mask to see her smile? Why, when asking my daughters about this issue, do they raise issues of entitlement, toxic masculinity, and the unfettered access to pornography? Rape, sexual abuse, and all the issues raised on Everyone's Invited are very real, undeniable. It is not woke, It is not political correctness. It is simply wrong. Patrick Moriarty, the head teacher of JCOS, the first Jewish cross-denominational secondary school in the UK, cites his pain at the school being named in testimony on Everyone's Invited. I quote, "Reading the post on Everyone's Invited is truly a trip into darkness. The darkness of teenage party culture, the darkness of our society, the darkness of the human heart, but above all, the black hole of toxic masculinity. It is a date with shame in every sense. Overwhelmingly, we see the shame inflicted on thousands of girls by thousands of boys, in page after page of sexual encounters, from the inept and boorish to the horrific and traumatizing. Their pain and humiliation is sometimes made worse by friends or adults, and occasionally better. The phenomenon has brought some of the darkest days I have known as a head teacher, and not only because my school is one of those named in some of the testimonies. Shame spawns shame. And I wonder how it is that violations unthinkable when I left school 35 years ago are now commonplace. And why, despite decades of legislation and progressive initiatives, things are getting worse, not better. As an adult, a man, a head teacher, I weep. Moriarty recognizes the temptation to focus on the pitfalls of anonymous testimonies on a website. But to do so would be to miss the point and once more to take the side of the perpetrator. Rather, he poses questions for schools to ask of themselves and concludes, we need to bring the energy of Everyone's Invited into our schools for balanced consideration and exposure to challenge, so that it can be refined into a fuller and deeper version of itself, ready to make a vital contribution to society. That is, after all, what schools do for students, and they are shaped and improved themselves along the way. By the power of education, let the dethroning of shame commence. We already do a good job at supporting our children to explore their complex identities in a safe environment, one that is supported but largely peer-led, and one that aims to equalize the roles of each individual. But what do we do now is never perfect. Progression is not a criticism of the past. It is not a competition. It is a constant going and growing together through life. While society is facing a particular problem of now, the foundations were set in the past. We all have a role to play in a synagogue community. So what questions can we ask of our synagogue? How can we encourage women to talk about their past experiences and girls to do so now? How can we support men hearing without feeling a need to justify, just acknowledging the pain and shame that has been felt? How do we help everyone's understanding of consent and not to judge individuals on the way they dress or appear? How do we talk about aspects of society that can bring joy and love and can also destroy lives? How can we stop the harming and shaming of girls without demonizing boys? Addressing these questions together helps us towards fulfilling our goal as a synagogue community, to instill a love of liberal Judaism that shapes the future of Jewish life. That is, after all, what synagogues at their best do for their congregants, and they are shaped and improved themselves along the way. By the power of synagogue community, let the dethroning of shame commence. Amen.